Hello. Oh, sorry. Um, Hi everyone. My name is Andile Dose. We are going to be starting with our meeting right now, with our webinar now. I'm really sorry for the delay. We had to take care of a few technical issues. But welcome to the webinar titled "Doing Men and Women: a dialogue on gender socialization." As I've already indicated, my name is Zandile Dose, and I will be facilitating this discussion. So today, our main focus is to unpack some of the debate and contestations on gender socialization, specifically looking at how, categories like class, race, ethnicity, and religion actually influence gender socialization. We have a very vibrant and diverse panel today. So excited, and they'll be helping us to unpack the conversation. So without wasting any time, I'll be introducing the panels. To begin with, we have Natalia Flores Garrido, who is a doctoral student at the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Nelson Mandela University. Natalia holds a master's degree in sociology by the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences in Mexico City. She has experience working on gender studies as an academic and also as an activist involved in collective feminist projects. Her latest publication is the paper Precarity from a Feminist Perspective, a note on 3 elements for the political struggle. This article was published in the Review of Radical Political Economics. I must also say that Natalia presented this paper here at CANRAD on the 13th of August. So if you're interested to understanding and learning more on this paper, you might as well check out the video on our website, on this Facebook page. Next to Natalia, we have Dr. Velile Vilane, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for High Resolution Transmission, Electron Microscopy, also here at Nelson Mandela University. As part of Velile's research, he designs manufacturing processes that optimize the mechanical performance of metals. Dr. Vilani is also sitting on the board of Social Health Empowerment, also known as SHE, which is a non-profit organization which empowers transgender women in the rural parts of the Eastern Cape. Dr. Vilani is also one of the founding members of Trans Swati, a non-profit organization which currently caters for the health needs, but also intends to cater for the legal and educational needs for transgender people in Swaziland. We also have Sianda Andries, who is a research assistant and master's student in anthropology, with his research focusing on the social constructions of diseases. Sianda holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Bachelor of Arts honors degree from the Nelson Mandela University. His broad research interests include how rural and urban people in the Eastern Cape, South Africa, make sense of the coronavirus pandemic and also related governmental lockdown measures, with a view of eliciting narratives that shed light on experiences of a pandemic in a democratic but unequal society. Last but not least, we have Mishumo Madima, who is a feminist academic and a singer. Mishumo started her career as one of South Africa's youngest diplomats, and after returning from a 4-year posting in Kenya, she decided to pursue academics. She recently graduated with a BA Honours Cum Laude in the Gender Studies Department from the University of Pretoria, where she's also currently doing her master's in sociology. Mushumo is also an Andrew Mellon Scholarship recipient. Mushumo is a music enthusiast and has written and performed a number of songs, including a commission by the Department of Defense, which saw her writing the official tribute to the National Defense Force. So that is all 4 of our panelists who will be helping us understand and unpack the discussion that we have today. Just a few housekeeping rules, colleagues. Can you all be mindful of the space that we're in by keeping all our cameras and mics muted at all times? Should we have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them on the chat session, and then after the discussion, we'll read them out and then allow our speakers time to to respond and engage. Those who are joining us straight via the live stream from Facebook, they should just post the questions in the comment sections, and we'll also be able to read them out. Without wasting any time, I'll give it over to Natalia, who will respond to the questions and share her inputs on today's themes. But yeah, let's enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandile, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us this morning. I'm very excited. I'm very grateful also to be part of this conversation. So I'm just gonna present quickly. I know I have 10 minutes, and it's just more, not much an answer, but most just like a provocation to all of you and see how can we dialogue around this issue. So the topic of this panel is how do we become men or women, and why do we reproduce this binary that results in oppression, exclusion, and unequal power relations among society. As the organizers suggested in the invitation, pretty much everything that happens in our life gives us some message regarding gender. We could analyze the gender messages that we receive in the family, the school, the church, social media, movies, books, shopping malls, etc. All of these are historical and therefore change with time and interact with other social identities like race, sexual orientation, age, etc. In my presentation, nevertheless, I would like to focus on a dimension that I think it's important to understand. How do we become men or women, and how deep is our commitment to uphold these identities? This dimension that I want to talk about is emotions as a way in which we embody messages regarding our gender. Although we usually think about emotions as a natural response of our body and our personality to certain circumstances, from a sociological perspective, we can also analyze how emotions are socially constructed. And how do we learn to embody social rules in such a deep way in which it really feels as if our bodies automatically respond with fear, anger, sadness, embarrassment, or shame without us being even able to control it. We feel like it's something that we just do, and we never realize or seldom realize that it's also a social response. To say that we learn how to feel, it's to say that our bodies and identities are socially constructed in such a deep way so that who we are, what we think, and how do we feel or experience emotions usually are part of the admitted, accepted, and intelligible way to respond to circumstances according to our identities as men or women, as well as our race, social class, and sexual orientation. From this understanding of emotions as socially constructed and its relation to gender socialization, I am particularly interested in the role of happiness as a way of social control. And it's important to say that I'm talking about happiness with capital letter. As a way of social control in something that guides our practices, efforts, and choices. Following the work of Sarah Ahmed in her book, The Promise of Happiness, we could say that, and quote, happiness is promised through proximity to certain objects. Objects would refer not only to physical or material things, but also to anything that we can imagine might lead us to happiness, including objects in the sense of values, practice, style, as well as aspirations. End of quote. Under our current neoliberal regime, individuals are supposed to be responsible for their own happiness. We can see this in the hundreds of books about self-help, lifestyle, as well as in the obsession that social media has with the idea of representing happy people. We could say, therefore, that happiness, with capital letter, has become more a path, a series of steps that we should follow if we want to be close to those happy objects that promise us happiness. How is this related to gender socialization and gender relations? Well, it is connected to gender because these happy objects or ideas that are close to happiness, with capital letter, are gendered, and in fact, they work as a way of social control because they direct individuals to certain life choices, always presented in gender terms. What does it mean to be a happy woman? This could be phrased as what does it mean to be happy as a woman? We can think of a number of responses to these questions and see how all of these examples are somehow related to the control of the lives and bodies of women. Being happy as a woman means being close to certain happy objects, like beauty, a partner, a husband, children, the house, care work, etc. An iconic example of what does it mean to be happy as a woman is the figure of the housewife as a powerful representation of the right choices for women that are ultimately translated into a happy life. Quoting again Sarah Ahmed, she affirms that how better to justify the unequal distribution of labor than to say that such labor makes people happy. When we track the figure of the happy housewife, we need to think of what the figure does and how that figure works to secure not just ideas of happiness, but ideas of who is entitled to happiness. End of quote. So this idea works in at least two ways. First, it directs the choices of women towards the happy object of the family and domesticity. And secondly, because women are supposed to be happy with this, because happiness should be the result of these choices. When happiness is not found in being a housewife, then what follows is that there is something wrong with the woman, that being close to the happy object does not feel happy nevertheless. This reminds me of a scene of the popular series Mad Men, I don't know if you watched it, in which Betty Draper, who is the perfect housewife, white, upper class, married to a successful publicist, mother of 2 children, etc. In one of the chapters, she has a breakdown and she doesn't know how to explain it. During the night, she's talking to her husband and she tells him that one of her friends is seeing a psychiatrist because of similar symptoms to hers. Her husband, surprised, tells her that it's up to her, but that he always thought that psychiatrists were for unhappy people. He then looks around at the perfect house, the clean dishes, the sleeping children, and asks her, "And aren't you happy with all of this?" Betty says that of course she's happy. Yes, of course she is perfectly happy, because what woman wouldn't be? This is just an example of how the idea of happiness works as a way of social control and also as a promise. It is not to say that those happy objects will bring us happiness automatically, because what those happy objects do is to make a promise that can be fulfilled or not, or that takes so much of our own efforts and investments in making it true to our lives. It is in this way that the idea of happiness in a time like ours that is so obsessed with being happy and with showing it forecloses other possibilities that could lead us paradoxically to more joyful places and perhaps more importantly, to more just ways of organizing society. So to end my participation, I would like therefore to once again follow Sarah Ahmed and the connections that she makes between feminism and a questioning of these ideas of happiness as a way of social control. To Ahmed, being a feminist is being a killjoy, in the sense that, quote, feminist genealogies can be described as genealogies of women who not only do not place their hope for happiness in the right things, but who speak out about their own happiness with the very obligation to be made happy by such things, end of quote. This means that the history of feminism is the history of unhappy women, not in a sense of miserable women unable to find joy, but of unhappy women in the sense of rebel women that refuse to follow the steps towards an accepted idea of happiness, and that expose how these ideas work as a way to control women's choices and lives. In this regard, I would like to finish my participation with the next 2 questions. The first one is, how does our current ideas about happiness and our personal attachments to those ideas reproduce systems of oppression and inequalities? And the second one is, how will it look like to be a happy feminist? Which means, how will it look like to be happy as a feminist? I think that a good clue to start thinking about this will be to understand happiness as a process of searching, linked to the opening up of new possibilities of living and feeling. This means that there is not a replacement of the idea of a happy woman in a conservative way to the idea of the happy feminist woman that we could imagine as someone who has power, who is independent, who is participating in the economy, etc., etc. As a feminist, I don't think we should focus on replacing one path to happiness for another one. Being happy as a feminist will mean perhaps using our political imaginations to destabilize affects as a way of social control and to give way to a world of possibilities Quoting one of my favorite parts of Sarah Ahmed books, I will echo her works in saying that to live happiness for life is to become alive to possibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for your contributions. We will give over to Dr. Velile Vilane to offer his contributions. Thank you.
Right. Hello, everyone. Zandile, do you mind removing the? Okay, just okay. There you go. So yes, hello everyone. My perspective is a little bit controversial, but you know, we do what we need to do. So in this dialogue, doing men and women, I'm gonna bring in a trans perspective. Thank you for the kind introduction, Zandile. I do always when I do these talks, I do want to specify from the onset that I'm not a gender specialist, but I am positioned in society to have unique experiences which are almost considered taboo, and they always bring me to these conversations. So my contribution to the doing men or women conversation will be bringing the experiences of women that society believes are men and the men that society believes are women. So what happens when the script is almost flipped? So I want to start my contribution with the root of the problem. We are who we are because our brains are configured in particular ways, which align with either the feminine or masculine spectrum of identities. Unfortunately, we do live in a society where gender is inferred from the shape of particular body parts at birth, and no attention is whatsoever is paid to brain configuration. This technically means that we gamble from the onset, hoping that the gender of each newborn will align with their sex. Most times we get it right because statistically there's a greater number of cisgendered persons in the population. Cisgender means people whose gender identity and expression matches their biological sex. However, we do not always get it right. There's a percentage of newborns that are misgendered at birth, and most times their caregiver doesn't know anything is wrong and may enforce punitive measures on any behavior that deviates from the assigned or the expected gender notions. This means that the child learns very early that they are not allowed to express who they are at their core. So punitive measures only force trans people to conform to their assigned gender norms, but they do not silence the trans person's internal perception of who they are. And this creates an internal conflict. Their brain becomes a clanging bell, almost like the church bell you hear every Sunday morning. The difference being this one doesn't actually stop. It reminds you every chance you get that you do not belong here. Every mirror reflection, every glimpse of yourself that you catch on a reflective surface. If you are trans-masculine, every person who calls you a she, all the dolls and dresses you receive as birthday presents, hearing a high-pitched tone of voice when you speak, the excruciating experience of undergoing female puberty and developing female sex characteristics. This is called gender dysphoria, and it infringes on the daily existence of trans people to the point of suicide. And medical interventions are required to combat gender dysphoria. I must add that the experiences that I'm talking about are of binary trans people, not necessarily non-binary trans people, because some people, not every trans person transitions. So, however, in the South African landscape, seeking medical interventions to combat gender dysphoria adds a new set of problems in many spheres of a trans person's life. To explain this, I will use experiences from different trans persons that some are South African, some are Swazis. So the first set is the workplace. So what happens when you transition and you are working? Yeah, we need to work to live. Transitioning discloses your trans identity and makes you susceptible to workplace discrimination. People didn't know that you were trans before, now know because you're transitioning. Research shows that 90% of trans people are experiencing harassment or are actively taking action to avoid harassment in the workplace. And of this 90%, this harassment is 5 times more likely to escalate to physical assault or ultimately lead to a negative job outcome, like being fired or being denied a promotion. When a trans woman informant, Dr. Anastasia Thompson, was faced with the challenge of transitioning in the workplace, they opted for unemployment as the most viable option to protect themselves from the looming workplace discrimination. Open quote. I chose not to rock the boat. Even if I had fought to keep my position, what would I have been left with? It might have left me in an uncomfortable position with co-workers and patients, close quote. So, knowing that South Africa has this progressive constitution, why would a trans person opt to be unemployed to avoid discrimination? The truth is, the South Africa's progressive constitution protects the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, but the South African mindset has not been as progressive as this constitution. Consequently, the treatment of trans people in the workplace largely depends on organizational culture, and trans employees are pitted against gender hierarchies that exist in the workplace. The expectation to look professional is embedded in traditional gender hierarchies, which force trans people to conform and perform to expected norms. Deviating from this expectation renders them vulnerable to structural discrimination, which escalates when the trans employees transition. So if there are no active trans policies in the workplace, the employer can handle the transition poorly and cultivate hostile responses from other employees. So when a trans woman informant Mahlatse Nguna transitioned in the workplace, she went through a process of being addressed as male and had to use the men's bathroom until her physical appearance was too hard and uncomfortable to hide. Open quote. A male colleague expressed discomfort with sharing a bathroom with a woman. I couldn't continue using the men's bathroom. It just didn't make sense. After the involvement of management in addressing the issue, the microaggressions started. They went around asking all the women in the office if they're comfortable with me, close quote. This experience othered Mahlatse in her workplace and caused her to isolate herself completely. To date, she refuses to use the women's bathroom on her floor, so she uses the bathroom on a different floor to avoid bumping into her co-workers. Another sphere that I'm going to bring up is legality, the legality of it. Remember, you do need to transition for medical reasons, but unfortunately, when you're there, you are then met with a whole plethora of problems. And one of them is that your ID becomes incongruent to your physical appearance. Since gender is inferred from birth sex and classified as male or female in all fundamental documents of identification, the birth certificate, the national identity number, driver's license, etc., this oversimplified version of gender has been erroneously assumed to be immutable to the extent that no one has ever questioned the effect of including gender markers in all fundamental documents of identity. Consequently, the intersection of the birth certificates, the trans identity, and access to public spaces like toilets, banks, etc., has become a contested issue in the 21st century. Trans people are positioned at the intersection of the oversimplified version of sex, gender, and the law. The gender classification, male or female, gender expression, and physical anatomy often collide with the oversimplified version of gender that is known by officials, and this often renders them as fugitives. The experience of trans persons being gendered as fugitives can be summarized by a quote from a trans woman informant. Open quote. I do not suffer from gender dysphoria. I suffer from bureaucratic dysphoria. My ID does not match my appearance. I worry every time I apply for a job, every time I authorize a credit card check, every time I buy a plane ticket, every time I buy a beer at the corner deli. I have changed my name, but my gender continues to be officially and bureaucratically male. Efforts to change this documented gender marker are met with sheer resistance to extent that require litigation, and not everyone can afford litigation to take the government to court. In South Africa, where progressive laws allow for changing of gender markers, trans people are still faced with the nuanced responses from Home Affairs officials, who sometimes demand that they must have undergone full sex reassignment surgery to access the law. Unfortunately, the waiting period for sex reassignment surgery in South Africa is up to 20 years. And this means that trans people are forced to live with national identity documents that are incongruent for a better portion of their lives. In Swaziland, where there are no laws supporting gender marker changes for trans people, Home Affairs officials find a platform to correct your gender expression each and every time you go and apply for a legal document, be it your passport, your ID, whatever. So, as far as a trans woman informant narrated his experience of attaining a legal document, Home Affairs officials refused to issue her identity card up until she conformed to the highest degree to her assigned male gender that reflected on the birth certificate. Open quote. I had to be taken to superiors because they did not understand me, but luckily she was friendlier and explained to me that a person has to look as natural as possible in their national ID. She asked me to remove my makeup, earrings, and I had to undo my braids, which I had just done the previous day. Because my hair was long, I had to tie it at the back. Close quote. Incongruent national identity documents affect trans persons' access to employment, opportunities, and public services. They invite an inherent bias when transgender persons apply for employment, attend interviews, or even try to access gender-specific medical aid benefits, which are often cisgendered. For instance, trans women who have male gender markers in identity documents cannot access estrogen therapy on medical aid because estrogen is for women. Why is a man asking for estrogen? That's the argument medical aid people make. Incongruent documents also open up room for workplace macroaggressions, which leverage of the legally recognized gender. So we will not call you she because your ID says male, so they hide behind those barriers. These experiences extend all the way to health sector. I mean, trans people find issues when they have to attend the hospital. Firstly, which ward are you going to be put in, the female ward or the male ward? It's really a confusion, but I did not include the health experiences because of time, so I just decided to end with the legal sector. So I guess that's a conversation that can come up in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veli. We'll give over to Sianda, who will be speaking next. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zandile. I hope you can hear me. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that I'm really grateful to be part of this discussion about doing men and women. And I'd like to say sorry for my voice. I think it's flu, hopefully. So, okay, so for me, my contribution to this discussion will be broadly on more of the gender division of labor specifically, because I one of the people who grew up in families that there is a distinct difference of gender division at home, more of a patriarchal kind of systematic home, And also, I am Xhosa, so I went to the Asian, which lately has been seen as part of the contributing factors to the gender-based violence against, especially in particular, to women. So my first point to talk about is that everything that has to do with violence today, it all starts the way that we're being raised. To the point whereby you would notice that for me, I was raised in a township, Utnake, and here it's a complex kind of town with a lot of different identities, and it also depends on what kind of family that you come from. So, but when you get to the varsity level of study, and then you would notice there that there's a vast difference of people coming from different places, and there are things that you cannot say, there are things that you can say. So those boundaries, they conflict with my identity. So in a way that it makes me having some sort of a double identity. So my point here is that we use, as kids, we were groomed with words that were used as ideas. So these words ended up being normalized, you see. And I remember asking Prof, who's my supervisor, Professor Christie, that now tell me, Prof, what do I do when now I am just having fun with my friends from the township, not the one who went to varsity? Now, as the conversations we have, you would find out that we use words that objectify women when we're talking about them. And to us, that is just a normal conversation. There is nothing wrong about that conversation. As a result, that leads to us feeling that we have some form of entitlement to their bodies, to who they are, and they depend on us, which is something that is influenced by this patriarchal system that we've been raised from. So another point that I want to raise before I explain is the one that, if you notice, I've always been making this example. If I go to Zandile's home and then I get there, if Zandile has a daughter and she's just sitting on the couch, laying her back and her legs are open, Zandile will stop the child and say, no, you don't do that. But if Zandile was alone, in most cases, you'd find out they won't stop the child. The child now is doing something wrong because there's a man in the house. So now that kind of knowledge that you infringe on a child, when they grow up, they know that, okay, so when I'm with men, there are things that there's a way that I need to socialize in. So there's a way that I need to hold myself and act as a woman. So these are the kind of categories that also they shape the understanding of gender socialization to kids. So when you grow up, it is hard to just change from the way that you were groomed from home to just understand that, okay, so now I cannot call a girl Icheri. I cannot call them Lamnan. I cannot say such things now. So that introduce some form of internal conflict within self. That now, when I'm in PE, I have this sort of identity that I have to maintain, which has a lot of boundaries because of how I grew up. You see, so these are one of the contributing factors that I wanted to discuss. And for me, my focus has been mostly in trying to figure out a way. I've been asking a lot of people about this, to find a way to just limit what is happening lately due to gender-based violence and other forms of violence that are happening out there, in a manner that I feel like there are things that needs to be restructured in our societies in order for us to understand each other. For an example, I'll make an example of what I've just discussed with my friends before joining this session. So I asked him, do you feel like men feel they feel the sexual entitlement from women? And then he said yes. And I asked him to explain. And then he said, well, before I explain, I have to tell you that this is because of the patriarchal system that we live in, which is the system that assumes that men have a right to have sex whenever they want to. Now, relating to the life that I've been living, I know that is true because in most cases, you'd find out as a man, you don't feel man enough without having sex. So the young boys that are growing up to become men, in order for them to be fully men, they have to have sex. And now people don't care whether how you find that sex, how you have come about into having sex with women, or how many women, or whatever you've done, just as long as you have sex. And after you have done that, people just glorify you. They see you as this type of person that is better than other men. But it's a different thing when a woman does that, because our societies only men who have more social privileges than women. So I'm saying these things because I feel like these are part of the things that are contributing to the gender-based violence that is happening today. Lastly, I don't have much to say. The last thing that I wanted to say, which is a contributing factor, is language. It doesn't have to be a verbal language, but language is very important in our social context, because the way that we say things, it's how we create meaning and understand our social lives. And now, in that language, this is where a lot of things start to groom, but we do not see that because a lot of things have been normalized in our societies. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sianda. Lastly, but not least, we have Mishumo Madima who will be presenting. Over to you, Mishumo.
Hi, sorry, I just started. I should have unmuted, but I was saying, thank you so much, Zandile, and all my co-hosts. This is such an exciting conversation to be part of. I'll begin here. I think that this conversation on gender socialization is so important, particularly during this Women's Month. I have felt very strongly that in South Africa, the policies are there to protect women, to protect people of all genders and gender identities. However, I feel that the home and these socialization processes are sort of what I would say are the final frontier in reaching gender equality. And so I am someone who likes to call myself a micro-feminist, in the sense that as much as I do believe in the importance of the policy side of everything, I like to focus on these daily interactions and where we find ourselves every day, and how these power dynamics come into play in our everyday interactions. So for example, I wrote a chapter in the book Living While Feminist, and I spoke about how my hair journey has been linked to my feminism journey. And in my thesis, I wrote about street harassment, that daily annoyance of hello baby, hello mtwanas, when you're walking down the street. And how that in itself is a form of violence, and it's a way that these power dynamics play themselves in our everyday lives. So thank you very much. So with that, in the spirit of the personal being political, I wanted to share my own experiences about how I was socialized, and what feminism has meant for me as a Venda and Christian girl. This is who I was socialized to be. And so I'll start with my culture. I think Venda women particularly, have this reputation of being demure and respectful. And in many ways, I would agree that the pride of a Venda family is to have a daughter who will make a good wife. We have in similar traditions where people have the male initiation practices. We and I think the Ndavela tribe have sort of female initiation practices where women are taken through the process of being taught how to be a good wife. And through those practices and processes, you learn that um, you know the entire basis of society is dependent on you being a good woman. If society is failing, it's because the women are not doing certain things right or according to law. And then you bring about my Christian upbringing, where once again there's a heavy policing of sexuality, and particularly a woman's sexuality. And I like to give an example of when you're a teenager and you have these endless youth conferences and youth seminars where you're taught about sex and about courtship in the Christian from the Christian perspective. And I remember one of those, a pastor said, "Can somebody give me an orange?" And somebody gave him an orange, and he took the orange and he started to squeeze this orange, and he kicks the orange until it's like all soft and juicy, and he pierces the orange and he squeezes the juice from it, and he drinks the juices. And once the orange has run out of its juices, he then opens it, like roughly, and he says, "So who will eat this orange?" And nobody say, it's like, so you see, this orange has run out of its juice. And people agree, and he says, yes, that is exactly what happens to a girl when you sleep with different men. You run out of your juices. So despite the fact that this is scientifically inconsistent, that science actually proves how much of a self-renewing organ the vagina is, there's just this narrative within the church and within society that a woman's sexuality is sort of like is a finite resource, that it's something that ends, so you must use it wisely because it's a resource that you can't just share with everyone. And the moment that you decide, God forbid, that your sexuality belongs to you, and that it is yours to do what you want and to explore with it, then what I call patriarchal protection, then you lose that. So growing up, I didn't like cooking or cleaning. I would rather have been stuck in a book than anywhere else. And I remember one of my relatives one day was just so frustrated with me, and she said to me, you can get all educated and get all the and read all the books and get all these doctorates, but at the end of the day, a man wants this. He wants hands. And so that was one way that was the one part in my resistance to say, no, I demand to be seen as more than somebody who will serve a husband and bear children. I actually happen to like reading and books, and that's where I find my happiness. And within the church, with this whole sexuality question, to say, no, this sexuality is mine to explore and to do with it what I would like to do. You find that when you decide to do that, then you start to lose from what I would say patriarchal protection. Society no longer feels that they need to protect you when you don't stick to the mold. I like what Dr. Velile was saying. It's very true that once you don't fit into the mold, there's just a lot of micro and macro aggressions, a lot of these violences that are imposed upon you, punishment and sanctioning, to try and get you to fit into the mold once again, or to remind you that you are an outlier, you are an outcast. So here I am, 33 years old, and in many ways just living my best life. I was a diplomat for 10 years. I decided I'm not doing this. I want to be an academic. So career wise, not according to the books. I'm single, I'm childless. So in many ways, I do not serve what society believes me to be, wants me to be. And there's a lot of trying to label or trying to sanction, trying to punish me. And I like what Natalia said, where it's like, I am supposed to be the most miserable woman on earth because I do not belong to anyone or anything. But in that way, in my own life, I find that just by living my truth, I am resisting this process of socialization. So I'll leave it there because I really do want us to get into discussions. But thank you so much for your time and thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much, Mishumo, and thank you to all our panelists. If we were doing this live and in person in a seminar, I would ask the audience to actually give you a round of applause, for your wonderful contributions. When everyone was sharing, I was thinking of my favorite quote from one of the authors I tend to lean on sometimes when I feel like the world is suffocating me. I'm trying to impose gender scripts on me. It's a quote from Umalebo Sefodi on her book Misbehave, and she says in the first chapter, learning and unlearning so many things that my ancestors were programmed with, I am today living to decode within myself. And I think each and every one of us today, you touch upon the idea of decoding and trying to move away from gender scripts one way or another. So yes, thank you so much for your contributions. I do have a question that I would also love to pose to the speakers, but I do think I will first start with the questions that are coming from the panel, from the audience. There's one question from Simpiwe that is for Natalia. And Simpiwe is asking, Natalia, you touched on it briefly with your striking example from Mad Men, but I was wondering if we could take it a bit further and consider the role of stories, fairy tales, and books in priming and prescribing a particular idea of happiness. So Simpiwe would like to know your thoughts on that, Natalia, if you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Simpiwe, for your question. And yes, I completely agree that stories, fairy tales, movies, books, all of that gives us a very specific message of how to be happiness and what does it mean to be happy, right? And it's very gendered and it's changing all the time as well. I'm always very surprised, like for example, with these Disney movies, and how if you watch like the first ones, like the all old ones when I was a little girl, and the idea of a woman's happiness was always to find like the perfect man or the prince, right? Someone that will rescue her, and the happy ending was always like this princess finding this guy or this prince to marry and to form a family, right? And it's very interesting how that idea has been changing in time. Like now, every time that I watch like these new Disney movies, I'm a big fan of Disney movies. I don't know why, but for example, like this one who is called Brave, or even Frozen, on all of that, they present an idea of happiness and gender and happy women that is much more complex. I would say it's much more complex than the previous ones, right? Like the first ones when the princess was just waiting for the prince. Now they're much more active, much more like the characters are more complex. But still, they always present you with this idea of a normative idea of how to be happy, right? How to be happy. And I think that that's very important. It's important to analyze how, even though it is changing and it's flexible, it's still very difficult to try to live outside those normative ideas, right? Because at the end, no one wants to be unhappy. we all want to be happy people. We all want to be happy. And the thing is that we don't know what will happen to us if we don't follow those rules, right? As Mishumu was saying, like, I also don't have children, and I don't think I will have. And people are always asking me, like, but then when you're old, what are you gonna do? You're gonna be so lonely, you know, you're gonna be like a miserable person, basically. And I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen with me when I'm old. Like when people ask me, like, but who's gonna take care of you when you are old? I don't know who's gonna take care of me when I'm old, right? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So that walking towards the unknown, it's of course is very scary. But that's the beauty of it, and the beauty of feminism and all of these movements, right? Is to imagine new possibilities. I don't know, maybe when I'm old, I'm gonna be living with my friends in a commune, taking care of each other, you know? We don't know. So because we don't know, that means that we are creating possibilities of something different to happen.
Zandile, can I add?
Yes, of course. It's a conversation. You can go on, Ms. Shumo.
Yes, I really, really love that question. I think in one of my papers, I did explore this idea of singlism, you know, where, you know, just like racism or sexism, there is a discrimination in society against single people, or even people who live a more, you know, even if they are married or whatever, people who don't attach or identify themselves, you know, with other people, especially women. And it is refreshing to see that, you know, things are changing. Like you were saying with Disney movies, I'm also, you know, obsessed. And Moana, I mean, I'm like, yay, you know, like a whole movie went by and there was no romantic interest. So things are changing, but you see in the subtleties. I think now in South Africa also there's the Seriously Single that just came out, you know, which I feel like also is having a more progressive message about how you choose to define yourself and happiness. So things are changing, but you're finding, you know, subtle. For me, it's like there are still subtle ways in which we are discriminated against, like financially, for example. I think the way that society builds itself is based on the fact that at a certain age, you're going to be part of a dual income household. And so you become deprived of certain privileges when you are not, you know, you're part of a single income household. Or even recently with lockdown, I was like, this lockdown is very strongly based on the assumption that all of us live with some or other person. So when they like stay home, they didn't realize that for some of us, you are actually isolating us from everything because we live alone. And you know, even when you fall sick, right? It's like there's an assumption that you know, you're gonna have somebody who's gonna come bring you to the hospital. And so when you bring yourself, there's just so many ways that this manifests itself, where you realize the world wasn't built for you as an individual, especially as a woman. The world is not protecting you or nurturing you or helping you grow. You know, as an individual, you're supposed to belong to somebody, and you have to create kind of that space merely just by existing and, you know, and following your truth. So yeah, that was my input. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Shumo. Natalia, we have another question from Sonwabo Sterman, and this is specific to Mexico. So Sonwabo is asking that he's currently crafting a gender piece that brings historical, sociological, and cultural perspectives on gender norms. He's intrigued by the number of literature discussing Mexico on dominant gender binaries. What is your view, Natalia, on the dominant discourse that suggests that in Mexico, the confluence of two cultures, Spanish and indigenous, that idealized the hyper-masculinity of the warrior has produced a popular culture that is particularly hostile to any sign of the feminine in a man and to a lesser degree of the masculine in a woman? So yes, he's just asking about your thoughts on that, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll respond just briefly because gender, it's always very complicated. And in Mexico and Latin America in general, it's also very complicated to understand, as well as in South Africa or in the African context in general, because you have to analyze what is now called Mexico and what is now called Latin America as obviously a colonized region of the world, right? We were always also colonized. And we also received these gender norms and gender ideas that were imposed on the population. So it's very complex. Like I don't know if I understood rightly the question, but the indigenous people, yes, they were warriors. Some of them were warriors, but they also had a women goddess, right? The women goddess of the war was a woman, or a genderless kind of creature called the Coatlicue. Very weird. But you can Google like those things and you'll see like this image of this kind of monster, but she was a woman. So in the indigenous culture was not like that binary as, or that, yeah, it was not as strong as it became later when the Spanish people arrived there and imposed their own view on gender, which were obviously Catholic and Christian and all of those colonial impositions that we know. And as a result of that, yes, of course, Mexican culture is now very machista. You know, we have this idea of the macho, the Latin American macho, who is very, who in the context of Mexico, to say that you are a gay person is to say an insult, right? Pretty much like everywhere. But yeah, we have that very strong problem of the Mexican macho man, and we also have very high levels of gender-based violence, very high levels of femicide. But I think it's complicated, and we will have to analyze it from a global South perspective. But yes, it's definitely a problem, and I always think that we have a lot in common with South Africa and other countries from the global South that we were colonized, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Natalia. We have another question for Sianda. This is from Professor Denise Zinn, and she's asking, she says that, Sianda, I appreciated your honest reflections on how boys and men are socialized into ways of behaving to prove themselves and to show that they're men, and the different standards applied to men and women. In her inaugural, Prof. Magnolia Ngcobo-Sithole made a profound contribution outlining how the socialization is inscribed into cultural rituals. How does one start addressing or challenging the impact of this kind of socialization? Where should it start and continue? And this is another question to you, Sianda. I think also, Velile, if you can respond to some of those questions, you can jump in. I'm just going to read the second question from Sonabo to Sianda, and then Sianda, you can respond to both questions. Sorry. Okay, so it says, your views, please, on the impact of COVID-19 on the Xhosa culture of ulwaluko and its impact on how gender is constructed, considering that it has been put on hold for the year 2020, Sianda. So.
Okay. Thank you, Prof, for the question. Okay, so I'll start with the first one. Well, for me, I believe that the way that we are made conscious of doing the right things, which benefits everyone accordingly, shouldn't start only at the varsity level. I shouldn't know that I shouldn't call women certain words in order for me to know that I'm right. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't know that only when I go to university. Because imagine now I spent almost 20 years being here in a township. Now I'm a fully grown person. There are things that you cannot unlearn. Some things are just installed in your unconscious mind. Because, for instance, if I grow up knowing that there is God, I am praying God, I'm going to church each and every Sunday. And that is considered right, as kids will learn through social interaction and through observations. So if I know that my parents are doing this, and this is considered to be the right thing, at 20, you cannot come to me and tell me there's no God. No matter how many books you come to me, I believe, if it's Natalia, she said that it's easy to live outside the normative world, where everything has been normalized to be the right things. And now you're trying to take yourself outside and review life from a different perspective. So it's not easy to just know that, okay, so from now, I know I shouldn't say this and this and this and this and this. And then tomorrow I wake up and I stop all of that. It takes time, a lot of time. So my point here is that for me, it should start even from primary schools, from religious spaces, from traditional and cultural spaces. When we are performing a ceremony, I believe back then it used to be a space for people to learn, not a space for men to benefit. It used to be a space for everyone to learn and understand and grow. So for me, it should be taught from a young age to girls and boys on doing men and women, if that's the case. So I believe that, yeah, for me, my answer to that is that it should start there and then continue up. As you grow up, you're growing up knowing what are the social and cultural things that needs to be understood by people when they are growing up, and not growing up and then start to learn later in life that, okay, so now this one is wrong, this one is right, and now I have to choose. But I grew up believing that this thing is the right thing to do because no one stopped me when I was practicing it growing up. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answer your questions, but that is my answer to the first one. Excuse me, I just need to look at the second one. The one from Botswana. Okay. So at least you are a Xhosa man also. So this one, I think it will only be challenging for me in my own understanding. It will only be challenging on a social space, not at home. For me, if I were a boy now, obviously a lot of boys are not friends with only boys. They are friends with boys and men. So there are social spaces that you cannot be in because for now you're still a boy. So as a Xhosa person, I think it's a huge challenge because I've seen some news. I forgot the right of the report about initiations being practiced in other places in Eastern Cape, whereby people are still going against the lockdown regulations to say, no, this is how we live, this is what we live. And in my research, it's how people make sense of the virus. No matter what happens, for me, I need to practice my traditions the way that I want to. I won't be stopped by coronavirus. So I feel like it is a challenge, but on a social level, that people might stigmatize you. They might call you names that you are still a boy, so you don't have a right to talk to me. And for now, it's not your choice as a boy to be a boy, but there are circumstances that are okay that you need to abide by in order for you to save out your life and the life of others. So it's a bit of a social challenge that Ulwaluko cannot continue at this level. So thank you for the questions.
Thanks, Asianda. I'm also receiving questions from the Facebook page, and I'm just going to read them before going back to the questions from the in the chat station. And I have two questions actually from Nobubele Puza. It's for you, Sianda, again. And Nobubele is asking, Sianda, you've spoken about upbringing as a factor for how men turn out. Given that many of Black South African families are female-headed homes, I think this places the outcome of men squarely on the feet of women. I'm leaving out the men that come in and out of our lives. I suppose I'm asking if there is another way to think about or complicated gender socialization for Xhosa and Sotho men, given the prominence of Ulaluko and the absence of women there. There's another question too. No, okay. So yes, let me just read the second question also. This one is going to Mishumo. I like the concept patriarchal protection, Mishumo. It feels like the complement of the cult of femininity that Professor Pumla Gola raises. What do we do with that need for that protection, the accompanying anxiety of not having it? I suppose that my grown age still levers somewhat of what the society will do to my little sister or to my nephew for not seeking it. So yes, there's two questions, one for Sianda and then the other one from Mishimo.
Sandile? Can you hear me? I'm gonna give Sianda a break. And I'll answer that question. Yes, definitely. I think this cult of femininity, of, you know, the moment that you don't belong, you are punished and sanctioned. Hence, even gender-based violence, right? If you read sort of the context of a lot of these interactions, it's when the woman tried to be like me, you know, you're trying to be like a man, or you're trying to speak out for yourself. And then you lose that protection when you don't play by the rules. It's definitely something that we ought to explore. And my view on that is that every individual that exists has the right to life, has the right to dignity, and has the right to define who or what they'll be. And that's where I see it. That's where we should start looking at society, to say we need to create an enabling environment for everybody to be allowed to be who they are. Yeah, so that's the way I see it.
Sianda, do you mind responding to the question, Ganobu Yulalugunai? Do you need me to read it for you again?
Yes, can you please read it for me again?
Okay, I'm just. Okay, so Nobu is asking that you've spoken about upbringing as a factor for how men turn out. Given that many Black South African families are female-headed homes, Nobu thinks that this places the outcome of men squarely on the feet of women. She's leaving out men that come in and out of our lives. He says that, I suppose I'm asking if there is another way to think about or complicate gender socialization for Xhosa and Sotho men, given the prominence of Ulaluko and the absence of women there.
Okay, can you please repeat the last part, Zanil? Please, the last sentence, which is a question. Zanile?
Yes, Yanda.
Yeah,
the last part. Okay, yes, so Nobu's asking that, is there another way to think about or complicate gender socialization for Xhosa and Sotho men, given the prominence of Ulaluko and the absence of women there?
Okay, that is very interesting. Okay, can I just please get at least 2 minutes to think about it in the way that I'm going to put the answer, because it's been a lot of questions coming in, so I never expected this one.
Hi, Senator. Sorry, I didn't get that. What were you saying?
Okay, sorry. I was saying, can I please get just at least 2 minutes? I'll answer it.
Okay, no problem. In the meantime, there is a question to Mishumo from Professor Christy van der Westhuizen, and she's asking, Mishumo, can you speak a bit more about the metaphoric constructions around women and their sexualities? What is the purpose and effect, and how does it fit with women's agency? Is sexual agency by women totally prohibited?
Definitely, I would say that. I would say that sexual agency for women in many parts of society is non-existent. You know, even I think somebody commented before I was reading the comments, and you know, this outrage over Cardi B's latest song "WAP," and I think what's making people uncomfortable is that here are women who are saying that we like sex and we happen to enjoy it. And that makes a lot of people, uncomfortable. So in many aspects of society, I see that a woman's sexuality is something that is supposed to serve men. We our sexuality exists for the pleasure of men. And the moment that you try and say that this belongs to me, you are labeled, either slut shamed, or even when we start to talk about issues like abortion also, you are being told what must be happening in your uterus. That right to decide if a baby can grow inside of you or not is something that is so highly contested even to this very day, because it ties into this idea that as women we don't belong to ourselves, and it even goes further, where aspects of a woman's sexuality that are maybe not pleasurable or pleasing to men are hidden or sanctioned. This idea of us having a period every single month, but to this very day, we hide, we hide it. We still don't live in a society where you can just openly, pick a tampon out of your purse and go to the bathroom. You're taught that with it comes a lot of hiding, a lot of shame. And even the process of childbirth, even though people have become a lot more open to it, there's still this thing of, you must kind of hide from the ugliness that comes with our sexuality. So through that, you see that, there's so much of ourselves that are hidden. Even our full sexuality is unexplored, because the only acceptable way that our sexuality can exist is to serve men. Zandile, I'm going to preempt and go to another question that was asked by Simpiwe, on whether the Venda and Christian ideas on gender socialization have always been in sync. This is a very interesting question. I find that they are in sync in the sense that, yes, we are raised to serve the patriarchy, to serve our husbands and our children. But interesting enough, in the Venda initiation practices, a woman is actually not expected to be a virgin by the time she gets married. In earlier times, in actual fact, it was expected that her virginity would be broken somehow, some way through this process of initiation, so that she actually really learns, what sex is and what to do. So in that way, I find that ideas around teenage pregnancy in Venda culture are not treated, girls who fall pregnant outside of wedlock in Venda culture are not are not shamed or punished in the way that the Christian tradition would expect that. In actual fact, it's sort of expected that it might happen that in her learning to have sex and learning how to please a man, a woman might fall pregnant outside of wedlock, and the first child then belongs to the parents, and then she goes on to get married somewhere else. So that I think has actually been quite interesting to find how now what was traditionally Venda to say, this value on virginity and purity wasn't there, has been overtaken by these Christian ideals where now there's an insistence on it in some places. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mishumo. So I have about 3 questions that are directed to Dr. Velile. The first one is from Daniel Erasmus, and Daniel's asking, Velile, could you please comment more on how banks discriminate or shame trans people? I'm also going to add another question from Simpiwe to you also, Dr. Vilani, that is asking, in relation to what Natalia presented on happiness, do you feel that there is or are existing archetypes for traditionally cisgendered men and women to be happy? Does the lack thereof for trans men and women and non-binary plus gender fluid people complicate one's expectations or ideas around happiness? That's Simpi's question. And then there's another one from Prof. Zin, and she's asking, the experiences you mentioned were so powerful and so real in everyday impact. What are the ways organizational structures need to change to be more enabling and possible for everyone to belong to the space? So I'll just give you these three questions, Dr. Villani, to respond to, and then we'll continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zandile. So I'm gonna start with the bank question because it's like the easiest. So the problem with the banks is when you approach a bank, you can't almost do any transaction without showing identification. And then you should even if it really doesn't involve identification, you would for instance, my personal experience, I go to Standard Bank and I'm registered as Miss whoever. So now I'm in the bank having a conversation with the teller, and they obviously notice that this person is not presenting as female. What is happening? So in the background, obviously I'm fraud, and in the background they are now calling police and whatever. So long story short, if I did not have physical proof that I had transitioned at that point, I was going to be put in jail, because I'm coming here in the space to defraud this person who's Miss Velile Vilane, and I have their cell phone number, I've got their ID. The thing is, it's almost like cisgender people do not think anything else exists between outside of the cisgender bracket, to the extent that when you present them with something else, they don't have a frame of it. They don't know where to start. So the immediate reaction, I mean, if you have an ID, you have a cell phone number, you have everything, and your passcode, your bank code, everything else checks. The best reaction is to say, you have clearly stolen all of this information, including the questions that we've asked you to verify if you are essentially, you've clearly stolen them. We'll call Ms. Vilane and find out where they are. When they call Ms. Vilane and this deep voice person responds, then they don't know what to do. We just need to take you and put you into jail and have the authorities figure, that's the response. It's not like, what could have happened to this? They don't approach it from that perspective. So, I mean, this is how banks can be discriminatory. So imagine, and I'm in Cape Town, the LGBTI capital. That's where this is happening. So imagine now in a small town somewhere where no one has discourse whatsoever. You probably land up in prison, and you probably land up in, let me not continue, because then even within the prison system, even within the jail system, they will put you in a cell that aligns with, so they'll put me in the male cell, and you know what happens there. Chances are you are probably going to get raped, and the story continues. So let me just stop there and continue to the next question, which is about happiness. I think part of the issue is that happiness has been aligned to, it's almost like you've been given a piece of a pie, and in this pie, it's been separated according to, you can only eat this pie if you have A, B, C, D, E, right? And if you don't particularly fit so well in this group, then you are viewed as someone who's coming in to eat a pie that doesn't belong to you. Let me elaborate on that. So if you are cisgendered, right, you are happy because I'm a woman, I've got a womb. I mean, I'm gonna be very gender essentialist. I've got a womb, I can do this, I can pay children, I can do a lot. And now a trans woman comes into the picture and says, but I'm also a woman. Now you are almost coming now to, finish my pie, and you're not welcome because firstly, you don't have a womb. And then it becomes a conversation of, what are you saying about cisgender women who have had to remove their wombs because are you saying they are not women? Then it becomes, an extended conversation in that particular matter. But the root of the problem with regards to happiness really is viewed as, how must my piece of my pie be taken for this person who is clearly not non-conformist? They're not behaving very well. Why must I suffer for, to accommodate them? We had a situation at the University of Cape Town where we're trying to remove gender markings from student cards, saying there's absolutely no need for a student to be Miss X on their student card, Mr. X on their student card, because then that puts the trans person at a disadvantage of, you don't have to walk around with a student card that is not congruent with how they physically present. It's unnecessary to take it out. And the biggest argument against that was, how are you not going to call me Mrs. in my student card? How are you not going to call me Miss? So essentially, the happiness was also rooted in that very norm of I'm a woman, you need to treat me in all of these ways, including putting a miss on my student card, and removing that, you're almost, you're taking away a piece of my identity. And this person who's advocating for you to remove this cannot be heard for those reasons, because inherently the femininity and belongs, it belongs to me, not them. They are coming into the party. They're not meant to be here. So it's like an us against them type feeling. And then if the them are coming now to take a piece of the pie from the us, it's happiness is down the drain, and it's a fight. So it's almost like, and it's a very difficult conversation then, because how are you accommodating trans and non-binary people into the conversation, all the grays? How are you accommodating them into the conversation without having to say the ways in which you view yourself and the ways in which you have put on solid boundaries to describe this is a woman, this is a man, are violent to other people? If you're not having this conversation, you are not going to be able to integrate the other people. And that's where the conflict is. Unfortunately, the happiness is rooted in those very rigid boundaries. This is a woman, this is a man. The experiences I mentioned were so powerful, and the ways in which organizational structures can change. You see, now this is the fight of the 21st century. Because if I were to say now, allow trans women in women toilets, there's going to be a conversation that comes up that says, no, but we don't want to be raped. How are you allowing men in female bathrooms? And that's a very big discussion at the moment. And you, even before we get to the concept of single occupancy toilets and all of those other structures that are going to prevent people from interacting within the toilet space, we are forgetting that toilets in particular have been an item that have been used to exclude people historically. Women were excluded from the workplace using toilets. There were no public toilets available in the workplace that were for women, and therefore women struggled when they were at the workplace initially to fit in, because the space was not accommodative to them. I wonder why at this time we are not seeing the same problem is repeating itself. Now it's just that it's trans people on the other hand. Look, I generally think that there's a lot of education that needs to go into it for structures to even start considering that they need to change. Because right now we are sitting in a position where we don't need to change because all of you are crazy. Why won't you just conform? And for them to even get to the mentality of actually we need to change because we are being violent, there's a lot of education that needs to come into it. And we need to firstly, I think the whole notion of assigning gender at day number 1 and putting it on all fundamental documents is not right. I think some countries are approaching it in a slightly different way. They enable kids to grow up a little bit and then formally, have them.
Dr. Villani?
Yeah.
Sorry for disturbing you. Because we're out of time.
Oh, out of time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So do I have another question? Yeah.
No, actually, there's no other question because now I just want to afford our speakers just a few seconds to close off your remarks, and I'm just going to come back to you, Dr. Villani. Mishimo needs to go somewhere, so I'm just going to quickly allow every speaker just a minute to wrap up, and then we can close off the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Zandile. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you so much. I just wanted to leave it here to say that feminism is again, I emphasize, is the right to be whoever it is that you want to be. And until society builds, until we build the kind of society that allows people to, actualize themselves, then we have a long way to go. So thank you so much. I have to rush to the airport, but this has been amazing, and I'll definitely be keeping in touch with all of you.
Okay, safe flight, Mishimo.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mishimo. So what's going to happen is, sorry. Unfortunately, colleagues, we can't afford to take any more questions. There's still questions coming in from Facebook, and there's so many questions that we haven't even touched on that are in our comment section. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to take all those questions, and then our speakers can respond, whether it's on social media or via emails, to the colleagues who post those questions. And luckily, we have all the emails because everyone RSVP'd, so I can assist in that regard. But yes, we're just going to continue with the rest of the speakers who are remaining to just give their closing remarks, and then we'll hand over to Simpiwe to offer an official vote of thanks on behalf of CANRED. Thanks. Dr. Villani, you can offer your closing remarks.
I thought I said a lot, so just give other people a chance to say something. Yeah, there's a lot on the trans topic. Yeah, I think any further questions we can have in a separate discussion. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I always am willing to, talk about my experiences, and hopefully, my aim is just if one person is able to interrogate and change their mindset in particular ways, then that's a win, because that's one less transphobe in the world.
Thanks, Dr. Villani. Sianda, you can go next, and then we can have Natalia closing, being the last person to offer her closing remarks. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Zandile, and thank you everyone for participating. And I really appreciate being part of discussions like this, because it also challenges me and gives me new insights about what is happening in our societies nowadays. And yeah, so I'm not sure if I should answer that last question or I should just answer it separately from the emails. But yes, for me, it's all thanks, and thank you to the speakers for the conversations that we've had.
Thanks, Sianda. Natalia, please go.
Yes, thank you so much to everyone and to the speakers, and thank you for asking such good questions to the audience. And I would just like to end by saying that all these questions you can ask also to yourself, right? We all should ask questions to ourselves about how do we feel, how do we become men or women, how do we feel with these identities, which ideas do we have? Because at the end, gender relations, gender subjectivities, gender identities is something that all of us live in this system, right? So all of us know something, understand something about this. We don't have to be gender experts to talk about this. So yes, just an invitation to think together on these issues. But thank you, all of you.
Thanks, Natalia. Thank you, colleagues. On my side, I believe I am done. Miyabula Lilali Nangom. So it was lovely to be part of this discussion. But I'm going to hand over to Simpiwe, who offered the official vote of thanks. But there is a request from Unobu asking if we can share social media handles of all the panelists with them. So I think after when we posted the video on our Facebook page, then we'll just include my social media handles of everyone, if it's okay with the speakers. Yes, thank you. Over to you, Simpiwe.
Okay, thank you, Zandi. Officially, on behalf of CANRAD, I would first like to thank you all for joining us for this thought-provoking dialogue. Thank you to our brilliant speakers, to Natalia Flores Garrido for that insightful take on the gendered idea of happiness. It was truly inspired. Thank you to Dr. Velile for providing such a destabilizing account rooted in a lived trans experience. It's accounts and perspectives like these which always keep the conversation open and not rooted in, very biologically determinist and reductionist thinking. Thank you to Sianda Andries for your take on patriarchy and the related ideas of sexual entitlement that men feel towards women's bodies, and also this idea of double standards with regards to sexual expression. And finally, I would like to thank, although she's not here to hear this, but thank you to Mishuma Madima on her enlightening take on gender socialization, particularly the focus on Venda and Christian perspective. Thank you all for a fruitful discussion, and to our guests and audience for your engagement and contributions. Thank you very much.